The stars seemed somehow brighter now, full of new possibilities and paths previously unimagined. The humans had given them more than a military lesson. They had given them a new way of seeing the universe itself. And somewhere in the great darkness between the galaxies, ancient signals continued to pulse their warnings, making the new alliance between humans and Valaxians not just an opportunity, but a necessity for the challenges that lay ahead. A new chapter. In the silence that followed, Grand Marshal Zexkar's scales slowly shifted through a complex pattern of colors never before seen in Valaxian military command, the biochemical admission of profound change. The Third Fleet, he transmitted finally, will remain in reserve. Supreme Commander Vexthor, you have tactical command of this diplomatic situation. The implicit admission in those words, reclassifying a military engagement as a diplomatic exchange, sent ripples of reaction through both fleets. Across the Valaxian ships, scales shifted in waves of blue-green revelation as crews processed the historic significance of the moment. A wise decision. Admiral Chen's image showed the first hint of a smile. Perhaps we can now discuss why we actually invited your diplomatic mission to Earth in the first place. Invited. Vexthor's scales flickered in confusion. Did you think it was chance that your long-range surveys discovered us? One of the human AI cores transmitted. We detected your observation platforms months ago. Rather than destroy them, we allowed them to find exactly what we wanted you to see. We needed to understand how you would react to a seemingly primitive species. The implications staggered the Valaxian command staff. The humans hadn't just hidden their true capabilities. They had orchestrated this entire sequence of events as a test of character. You see, Chen continued, we've been watching the Empire for some time. Your territory expansion, your technological development, your treatment of other species. We needed to understand whether you could adapt, could accept new paradigms, whether you could learn. The holographic displays shifted again, showing new images, vast construction projects in human space that had been completely hidden from Valaxian sensors. Shipyards building vessels that dwarfed even their current battleships. Research stations probing the fundamental nature of reality itself. We're about to enter a new era of galactic civilization, Chen explained. There are threats coming that will require all of us to work together. Not as dominant and subordinate species, but as equals, each contributing our unique perspectives and capabilities. What threats? Zexkar asked, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. We've detected signals, one of the AI cores answered. Very old, very distant signals. Evidence of civilizations that faced the same choice the Empire faces now. Adapt to new ways of thinking, or stagnate and fall. Some of the signals suggest outcomes that concern us greatly. Vexthor's tactical mind was already racing ahead. You need the Empire, not as conquerors, but as partners. Our organizational capabilities, our established infrastructure, our experience in coordinating multiple species. Yes, Chen nodded. But we needed to know if partnership was possible. If you could acknowledge that younger civilizations might have something to teach you. If you could accept that true strength comes from diversity of thought and approach, not from enforced conformity. And if we had failed this test, Zexkar asked quietly. The human ships shifted again, their metamorphic hulls briefly revealing weapon systems that had remained hidden even during the battle. Systems that made their previous displays of power seem trivial by comparison. Then we would have contained the Empire until you were ready to learn, Chen said simply. But you proved today that you can adapt, that you can question your assumptions when presented with clear evidence. That is the foundation we can build upon. Vexthor moved to the center of his command deck, scales shifting to formal diplomatic patterns. Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Valaxian Empire, I request the opening of formal diplomatic channels, not for your submission to the Empire, but for mutual exchange of knowledge and capability. Granted, Chen smiled fully now. And perhaps the first lesson we can share is why we choose to show mercy even when we have the power to destroy. Why we value the evolution of understanding over the imposition of will. As the human fleet began to stand down their weapons, their ships morphing back into more conventional configurations, Vexthor reflected on how completely his understanding of power had changed in a single day. The humans had demonstrated that true superiority wasn't about technological advancement or military might. It was about the wisdom to use that power with restraint, and the desire to elevate others rather than subjugate them. The Valaxian Empire had arrived expecting to find another primitive species to absorb into their hierarchy. Instead, they had found teachers who would help them grow beyond their self-imposed limitations. As the first diplomatic shuttles began to launch between the fleets, Vexthor realized that this wasn't the end of Valaxian greatness. It was the beginning of something far more significant. The Second Fleet's formation began to crumble as ships were systematically disabled. The humans targeted engines and weapons, deliberately avoiding crew compartments where possible. Even in the midst of all-out combat, they maintained their policy of calculated restraint. "The Third Fleet stands ready to deploy," Zexkar announced, though his voice had lost its bombastic confidence. "We will commit every ship in the Empire if we must." Grand Marshal Chen's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Look at your tactical displays. Really look. We've disabled a third of your fleet without inflicting a single casualty. Your weapons can't touch our real ships. Your defenses can't stop our attacks, and we're still using only a fraction of our capabilities. How many more lives are you willing to waste?" Understanding the enemy. Vexthor watched the tactical displays with growing comprehension. Every movement of the human fleet revealed new layers of sophistication. Their ships weren't just technological marvels. They were expressions of a fundamentally different way of thinking about space, time, and warfare itself. "Grand Marshal," he transmitted, his scales shifting to the deep green of revelation. "They're not trying to destroy us. Look at their attack patterns. They're teaching us." "Nonsense," Zexkar snapped. "They're simply inefficient in their targeting. All ships, concentrate fire on." "No," Vexthor interrupted, an action that would normally mean death in Valaxian military hierarchy. "Each engagement has been a carefully constructed lesson. They demonstrated their stealth technology first, showing us that our assumptions about them were wrong. Then they're drone fighters, proving that they think differently about combat operations. The metamorphic ships, the AI integration, each revelation carefully timed to break down our preconceptions. A new hologram appeared on their displays, a three-dimensional reconstruction of the entire battle from its beginning. But this version was annotated with tactical analyses, showing how each human maneuver had been precisely calculated not to destroy, but to educate. "We've been analyzing your responses," Admiral Chen confirmed. "Your tactical doctrines, your technological assumptions, your hierarchical command structure, all of it reveals how deeply ingrained certain patterns of thinking are in your civilization. We needed you to understand that there are other ways of approaching problems." The hologram zoomed in on a Valaxian cruiser being disabled. In slow motion, they could see how the human weapons had threaded an impossibly precise path through the ship's systems, shutting down its combat capabilities while deliberately preserving life support and crew safety systems. "Your weapons could have destroyed our ships instantly," Vexthor realized. "Instead, you calculated exactly how much force to use to disable without destroying. The computing power required for such precision is considerable," one of the human AI cores agreed, "but necessary. We have no desire to cause unnecessary death. Our goal was to demonstrate that your current path, enforcing uniformity across species, is ultimately limiting. The greatest advances come from diversity of thought and approach." Grand Marshal Zexkar's scales had shifted to the modeled patterns of cognitive dissonance. "But we are the Empire. Our way has worked for millennia. We bring order and progress to. You bring stagnation," Chen corrected gently. "By forcing other species to conform to your methods, you eliminate the very innovations that could advance your civilization. Look at your own history. When was the last truly revolutionary breakthrough in Valaxian technology? Not refinements of existing systems, but completely new approaches. The question hung in space as Valaxian commanders across both fleets searched their memories. Their technology was supremely advanced, yes, but it had been centuries since anything truly unprecedented had emerged from their research centers. Your isolation was your greatest advantage. Vexthor understood now. You had to solve problems without any reference to existing solutions, and when you developed AI, we approached it differently. Chen nodded. Not as servants or tools, but as partners in evolution. Our eyes aren't bound by organic preconceptions about what's possible. They help us see new paths, new possibilities, and we help them understand the value of life, the importance of restraint. The battle had completely stopped now, both fleets hanging motionless in space as the exchange continued. The humans had achieved something far more difficult than military victory. They had forced their opponents into a fundamental revaluation of their most basic assumptions. Because your pride couldn't accept that a primitive species might have something to teach you. And this now, before we're forced to demonstrate even more of our capabilities. The tactical display told a brutal story. Half his fleet was already destroyed or crippled. The human fighters were herding his remaining ships into killing zones with an efficiency that no organic commander could match. Their battleships had yet to even fully deploy their weapon systems. The glimpses of additional weapon ports and energy signatures suggested they were operating at a fraction of their true capacity. Yet it was the humans' evident restraint that finally broke through Vexthor's pride. They could have destroyed his entire fleet in the opening moments of battle. Instead, they had chosen to demonstrate their superiority progressively, giving him multiple chances to withdraw. They were fighting not just with advanced technology, but with calculated mercy. The nature of humanity. All ships, stand-down weapons. Vexthor commanded, his scales shifting to the blue-gray of formal surrender. Admiral Chen, we. A new signal cut across all frequencies, emanating from the direction of Valaxian space. Belay that order. The harsh voice of Grand Marshal Zexkar filled the command center. The Second Fleet approaches. Hold position and maintain combat stance. Vexthor's scales rippled with horror as his sensors detected the massive reinforcement fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel. 50 capital ships, the pride of the Empire, emerged into normal space. Grand Marshal Zexkar had clearly been monitoring the situation and decided to commit the Empire's main battle force rather than accept the humiliation of defeat. Admiral Chen's expression remained unchanged. More ships won't alter the fundamental equation, Grand Marshal. You're only risking more lives. We are the Valaxian Empire, Zexkar's voice boomed. We do not submit to lesser species. All ships commence full assault. Overwhelm them with concentrated fire. The space between the fleets erupted with energy as hundreds of Valaxian weapons opened fire simultaneously. For a moment, the sheer volume of fire seemed to overwhelm even the humans' advanced defenses. Several of their smaller vessels disappeared in the barrage. Then the holograms flickered out, revealing that the destroyed ships had been more decoys. The real human fleet had already relocated, using their mastery of space-time to shift position instantaneously. You still don't understand. Admiral Chen's voice carried genuine regret. We tried to spare you this knowledge. The human battleships began to change. Massive sections of hull plating shifted and reconfigured. What had appeared to be solid metal flowed like liquid, transforming into new shapes and configurations. The vessels were not just ships. They were made of programmable matter, capable of adapting their entire structure in real time. Impossible. Zexkar's voice had lost its certainty. No civilization has achieved macro-scale metamaterials. Because you all followed the same technological paths, Chen replied. You built upon each other's knowledge, refined the same basic principles. Humanity had to develop in isolation, finding our own ways to solve problems. We had to innovate because we couldn't copy. The transformed human ships now bristled with weapon systems specifically configured to counter Valaxian defenses. Their hulls had reorganized to present minimal target profiles to Valaxian targeting systems. Even their internal systems had reconfigured to optimize power distribution for the current tactical situation. The battle that followed was brief and devastating. The human vessels moved with perfect coordination, their AI cores calculating optimal firing solutions faster than organic brains could process thought. Their adaptive hulls absorbed or redirected incoming fire, while their phase-shifting weapons bypassed the strongest Valaxian shields. The autonomous fighter swarms had evolved new tactics, forming into fluid geometric patterns that confused Valaxian targeting systems. They flowed around enemy fire like schools of fish, each drone's movements anticipated and supported by its companions. The autonomous fighter swarms had evolved new tactics, forming into fluid geometric patterns that confused Valaxian targeting systems. They flowed around enemy fire like schools of fish, each drone's movements anticipated and supported by its companions. Fascinating. One of the human AI cores transmitted on an open channel. Your tactical doctrine assumes hierarchical command structures and linear causality. You've never encountered emergent strategic evolution or true distributed consciousness. Vex Thor felt his scales involuntarily shift to the yellow-green of uncertainty, a color he hadn't displayed since his academy days. The humans had expertly manipulated them, letting the Valaxians' own arrogance blind them to the truth. They had walked into a trap of their own making. For the first time in his long career, Supreme Commander Vex Thor of the Valaxian Empire faced a choice between his pride and his survival. The humans had outmaneuvered them before the first shot was even fired, and he had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning of their surprises. The Hidden Fleet. Pride 1. All ships, battle formations. Vex Thor commanded, his scales now pulsing with the deep red of combat readiness. Show these humans the consequences of their defiance. The Valaxian fleet moved with practiced precision, their formation-based combat protocols honed over centuries of warfare. Energy weapons powered up, shields intensified, and targeting systems locked onto the nearest human vessels. Admiral Chen's image disappeared from their screens. In the silence that followed, Vex Thor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Perhaps the humans' confidence would crumble in the face of actual combat. The first volley from the Valaxian ships lit up space and passed harmlessly through the nearest human battleship. The massive vessel flickered and vanished, along with several others. Holograms. Ixal's crystalline arrays strobed in alarm. They're using some form of advanced projection technology. We can't distinguish their real ships from the decoys. Before Vex Thor could issue new orders, space itself seemed to twist around his fleet. The real human ships emerged from what his sensors insisted was completely empty space, their vessels appearing at point-blank range. They had somehow masked not just their presence, but the very distortions their drives created. Multiple new contacts. Ixal reported, her voice harmonics rising in pitch. Smaller vessels deploying from the human battleships. Energy signatures. Impossible. They're operating without crew. Swarms of autonomous fighters poured from the human capital ships, their movements unconstrained by organic pilots' biological limitations. They accelerated at forces that would have reduced any living being to paste, executing maneuvers that defied conventional tactics. Their drones are networked. The tactical officer reported, his scales shifting rapidly between colors of confusion and fear. They're demonstrating emergent behavior patterns, adapting to our defensive algorithms in real time. The human battleships opened fire with weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics as the Valaxians understood them. Beams of coherent darkness that absorbed shield energy rather than impacting it. Missiles that existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously, making interception mathematically impossible. Fields of localized space-time distortion that caused Valaxian targeting systems to spiral into recursive errors. Supreme Commander, Ixal's voice had taken on the harmonic of pure awe. I'm detecting artificial quantum consciousness cores in their vessels. They've achieved true AI integration. Their ships aren't just carrying computers, they're partnered with digital sentience. The implications staggered Vexthor. The humans hadn't just hidden their technological capabilities. They'd achieved breakthroughs that Valaxian scientists had deemed theoretically impossible. While the Empire had focused on perfecting known technologies, humanity had pursued radical innovation, breaking through barriers that older civilizations had long accepted as immutable. 3 Valaxian cruisers vanished in rapid succession, their shields bypassed by weapons that operated on principles their defensive systems couldn't comprehend. The autonomous fighter swarms had already adapted to Valaxian point defense patterns, using their impossible maneuverability to exploit gaps in coverage that existed for microseconds. Multiple hull breaches. The damage control officer's scales had gone completely white, the color of system shock. They're using some kind of selective phasing technology. Their weapons are passing through our outer armor as if it doesn't exist, then rematerializing inside our ships. Vexthor watched in horror as his carefully arranged formation dissolved into chaos. The humans weren't just fighting with superior technology. They were fighting with completely different rules. Every doctrine, every tactic, every assumption in his centuries of combat experience was being systematically invalidated. Admiral Chen's image reappeared on their screens, her expression now carrying a hint of sadness. "Your ships are dying, Supreme Commander. Your crews are dying. And for what? Because we refuse to submit to an empire we've never heard of. First contact gone wrong." Supreme Commander Vexthor of the Valaxian Empire stood at the command center of the stellar dominance, his flagship's holographic displays showing the newly discovered human territory. His iridescent scales shifted colors with anticipation as he reviewed the preliminary reports. The humans were barely 2 centuries into their space age, primitive by Valaxian standards. Their spacecraft still relied on reaction mass for propulsion, and their colonies only stretched across 3 star systems. Another species ripe for integration into the Empire. Vexthor announced to his bridge crew, his primary hearts beating with satisfaction. The Valaxians had brought countless civilizations under their banner over the millennia. Some through diplomacy, others through force, but all eventually accepted their place in the grand hierarchy. The diplomatic probe they'd sent to the humans' central world had returned with surprising data. The humans had politely but firmly rejected the offer of protected status within the Empire. More puzzling still, they showed no fear when informed of the consequences of refusal. The diplomatic AI had noted this as an anomaly. Every other species at this development stage had either accepted protection or demonstrated obvious terror at the prospect of resistance. They must not truly understand their position, Second Commander Ixel suggested, her crystalline sensor arrays glowing softly. The databases show they've never encountered another spacefaring civilization before us. Perhaps they believe their primitive kinetic weapons and nuclear devices would be effective against our shields. Vexthor's scales rippled in amusement. Then we shall educate them. Prepare the first wave. 3 battle groups should be sufficient for their level of technology. Standard protocol. Disable their orbital infrastructure, demonstrate our superiority, and accept their surrender. The invasion fleet assembled with precision, 15 warships arranged in perfect geometric formations. Their hulls gleamed with energy screens capable of shrugging off nuclear detonations. Their weapon systems could reduce cities to ash from orbit. It was a force that had conquered dozens of worlds. As the fleet approached the edge of human space, Vexthor received another puzzling report. The humans were making no obvious defensive preparations. Their ships continued their regular patrol patterns. Their orbital stations maintained normal operations. Either their sensors were truly primitive and hadn't detected the approaching armada, or Supreme Commander, Ixel's voice carried an unusual harmonic of concern. I'm detecting some anomalies in the background radiation patterns of the system. The variations don't match any natural phenomena in our database. Elaborate, Vexthor commanded, his scales shifting to a more attentive hue. It's as if, as if space itself is slightly distorted in certain regions, but our sensors can't get a fix on the source. The effect is subtle. We would never have noticed if we weren't doing a full tactical sweep. Before Vexthor could respond, new alerts flashed across the command displays. Massive energy signatures were suddenly blooming throughout the system, directly in the areas of spatial distortion, where empty space had existed moments before. Human warships were appearing, not the primitive vessels they'd observed, but massive battleships of completely unknown configuration. Impossible. Ixal's crystalline arrays flashed in alarm. They're running energy systems we've never encountered before. Their hull compositions don't match anything in our materials database. These ships, they're more advanced than our own. Vexthor's scales had shifted to the deep purple of tactical focus. The humans had somehow masked their true capabilities, letting the Valaxians see only what they wanted them to see. And now his overwhelming force was badly outnumbered by vessels of superior technology. A transmission cut through all their communication channels. The human commander's image appeared on their screens, a female of the species, her dark eyes reflecting the same calculating intelligence Vexthor had seen in the most dangerous predators of his homeworld. "This is Admiral Helena Chen of the Earth Defense Force," she announced, her words automatically translated by their systems. "Your invasion fleet has entered restricted space after our formal rejection of your diplomatic overtures. This is your only warning. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. We would prefer to avoid bloodshed, but we will not submit to imperial aggression."